is 7:33 p.m. on Tuesday, February 25th, 2025. Good evening. My name is Christian Klein, and I am the chair of the Arlington Zoning Board of Appeals, and I'm calling this meeting of the board to order. I would first like to confirm that all members and anticipated officials are present. Members of the Zoning Board of Appeals, we have Roger DuPont.
Here.
Patrick Hanlon.
Here.
Venkat Hawley.
Here.
And Adam LeBlanc.
Here.
And our associate member, Bradley Baranowski.
Here.
Good to have you all with us. Here on behalf of the town, we have Colleen Ralston, our zoning assistant.
Here.
Good to have you with us. And I had seen Joanne Robinson's name earlier from the Conservation Commission, from the Historical Commission, but I don't see her now. But hopefully she'll pop back in. And then the applicants for docket 3835, 28 Draper Avenue, with Vipender Singh and Kelly. Good to have you with us. So tonight's meeting of the Arlington Zoning Board of Appeals is being conducted remotely, consistent with the supplemental budget bill signed by Governor Healy on March 29th, 2023, which extended temporary provisions pertaining to the open meeting law to March 31st, 2025. The extension of these provisions allows public bodies to hold their meetings remotely by providing live, adequate alternative means of public access to the deliberations. This meeting is being recorded and will be broadcast by ACMi. Members of the public who are participating by Zoom and who wish to offer public comment should be aware that they will be asked to provide their full name and address so that a complete public record of the meeting can be taken in accordance with state law. All participants of this meeting are advised that people may be listening to the meeting without offering public comment, and those people are not required to identify themselves. Any votes that are taken this evening will be conducted by roll call. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. As chair, I reserve the right to take items out of order in the interest of promoting an orderly meeting. But for this meeting, we have only one agenda item, which is docket 3835, 28 Draper Street. So before opening tonight's meeting for public hearings, here's some ground rules for clear and effective conduct of tonight's business. After I announce the agenda item, I will ask the applicant or applicants to introduce themselves, make their presentation to the board. I will then request that the members of the board ask what questions they have on the proposal, and after the board's questions have been answered, I will open the meeting for public comment. At the conclusion of public comment, the board will deliberate and vote to either continue or close the public hearing. All votes will be conducted by a roll call. Final vote on any matter before the board will be taken at a subsequent meeting once the written decision has been drafted and provided to the board. The decision will then be filed with the town clerk, starting the 20-day appeal period under state law. After that time, the applicant may proceed with their building permit. However, under state law, no decision granted by this board shall take effect until a certified copy of the final decision has been filed with and recorded at the Middlesex South Registry of Deeds in Cambridge by the applicant. So with that, I will open up public hearing for docket 3835, 28 Draper Street. Although this is technically a continuance from the last hearing, but all we did at the last hearing was open and immediately continue. There was no receipt of any testimony or any evidence at that hearing. So this is effectively a fresh hearing, but we did open last time basically because we were up against the 65-day deadline to open the hearing. So with that, I would ask the applicants to introduce themselves and tell us what they are proposing to do.
Hi, my name is John. Oh, sorry.
No, you go, John.
I don't know if you can see me. For some reason, my video doesn't seem to be on. But anyways, my name's John Lodge. I'm Kelly's architect for the proposed ADU at 28 Draper Street. Kelly, you want to introduce yourself?
I am Kelly Casey. My husband, Vipender Singh.
Hi.
We're the residents at 28 Draper.
Thank you.
Should I share my screen, or how would you like to proceed in terms of just going through the application?
Colleen, can you go ahead and give him permission to share?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I was just asking our administrator to make you a co-host, and there you are. You should be able to share now.
All right, great. All right, so start at the beginning. So basically, what we're proposing to do, the site right now has a Victorian house and a barn in the back. The barn, I believe, was built basically at the same time as the house. And we actually went before the Historic Commission because our original intent was to try and take the barn down in order to give ourselves the room we needed to create an ADU for the resident. The residents have an elderly parent who they'd like to who's living abroad, who they'd like to move into an ADU in the back of the house. So our first instinct was to see if we could take the barn down and then create a new addition at the back of the house to create the ADU. We went before the Historic Commission, and they didn't want us to take the barn down, but what they proposed instead was, or what we proposed was that we would attach the barn to the house, and then use that to build our ADU. So right now the barn is located right here in the back corner of the lot, and here's the existing house. So our our proposal is to take the barn and move it and basically attach it to the back of the house to create a new ADU. So there we meet a number of the zoning criteria, but not all of them. So by moving the barn, we create enough usable open space to satisfy that requirement. We meet the two side yard setback requirements. However, because of the size of the existing barn, we do not meet the rear yard setback. So let me just quickly go through the plan. So the first floor plan would contain basically living space, and then there'd be a bedroom and a bathroom at a lower level and basically in the basement. And then what's currently sort of the attic space would actually be added into the living space of the existing unit. So the existing square footage, including the barn, is currently adds up to 2,878 square feet. The proposed layout, which when we move the barn, we actually there's a little back hall that we take off. So the proposed layout actually marginally decreases the square footage. So I can show you that in the elevations. So this is the front elevation, which doesn't really change at all. You can't see, well, but the one thing you can see is that the barn way back at the rear of the site, you won't be able to see that anymore because that will be sort of moved, tucked right behind the house. So here's the existing location of the barn in elevation. Here's the proposed location of the barn. So basically what we do is we would rotate it 90 degrees and attach it to the back of the house. So this is the existing rear elevation, and here's the proposed rear elevation. So here it's not actually attached to the house because it's at the back of the lot, but here it is. So this is the This is the proposed new rear. And that's the other side. So again, basically, what we're proposing to do is to take it from that rear corner and pull it back and attach it to the side of the house. So, sorry. So that effectively what this does do is it takes the barn away from the abutters on this side and the abutters on this side. It does move slightly closer to the abutters on this side to their garage, which is right there. But on that side, as I said, we are within the we meet the side yard setback line. So basically, the one thing we find ourselves sort of handcuffed because we're not allowed to take the barn down. And I know, you preferred if we weren't within the rear yard setback. So, so basically that's where we're asking for.
Thank you. So the current depth of the site,
88 feet.
88 feet. And then the 20% of 88 feet, is that the 17.6?
17.7.
Okay. So what's the current setback of the house, not the barn, but the house itself?
So the current setback of the house is 20, 25, or sorry, 26.
26 feet.
Yeah.
Okay. So currently the house is compliant with the rear yard setback.
Yeah, the house conforms.
Yep. And the garage, because it's an accessory structure, does not affect that.
Right.
But once it is connected to the primary dwelling, it becomes a part of the primary dwelling, and therefore it will be no longer compliant with the rear yard setback. So it will be a new nonconformity that's introduced by its connection to the house. Is there, so I just for the board and for the public, so this is sort of one of the primary issues here in this case, is that because it's a new nonconformity, it becomes a variance request rather than just a special permit request. Special permit is governed by a different section of law than variances. The criteria for variances are very different. They're dictated in state law. And we will review and go through those shortly. But I'm curious if there was any, if you had looked at any options for the accessory dwelling unit as a rear addition that would have involved the demolition of the barn. Would those have been compliant with, would those have required a variance, or is it just the?
No, so if we were allowed to take the barn down, then we had a scheme that worked for the client, that met the setbacks. I mean, yes, we still need to get a special permit for the ADU.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is we're not allowed to tear the barn down.
Right. Could it have been built with the barn still standing in its present location?
I don't think it could, because I think we would have, I don't think we would have met the usable open space requirement.
I see. Okay. And so the barn itself, where you say you're not allowed to demolish it, it's that the historical commission determined that it was historically significant and requested a 1-year demolition delay. Is that the situation?
We didn't do it that way. My name is Joanne Robinson and I'm on the Historical Commission.
Thank you, Ms.
And we did not, you know, want to have the barn demolished. And so that's nothing. That was why we moved to move it.
Could you provide just a little background on the meetings that were held before the Historical Commission on this property?
We had one hearing about this, and I had talked with John about how we could preserve the building itself. And so that was what made it, you know, this way, because the owners of the house wanted to have the building attached to the, you know, existing house.
Mhm. Okay.
And, you know, so this, John and I talked about this, and then we brought it before the commission, and that was how this happened.
Okay. And was there any discussion at the hearing about trying to apply for demolition permit and
No,
no? Okay.
no, not
Okay.
that's what I said.
Yep. Nope. I just wanted to confirm.
Yes. No.
Okay.
No is correct.
All right. Thank you. So are there additional questions from the board? Any questions from the board on the application?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. DuPont.
So I just wanted to clarify a couple of points. So there was the question you asked, which had to do with whether or not, if it had not involved the demolition of the barn, whether the plan that they might have had in mind then, let me rephrase that. So if the barn was gone, did they have a plan? I think this is what you asked. This is what I was wondering as well. Do they have a plan that would conform to the zoning requirement of the 17.6-foot rear yard setback? And, you know, as I was looking at one of the plans before, it looked like that would only give you like 9 feet off the house, off the rear of the house in terms of extending to the rear. So I didn't understand how that would have been possible in the first place if all you had was that 9 feet, unless
You have 13 feet.
okay. So even with 13 feet, the other question I had, and it wasn't clear from the table that was presented, was how many square feet is the living space proposed to be if you did move the barn and attached it? What's the living space in the ADU?
So the barn is basically 400 square feet. So the living space in the barn would be about 720 square feet.
Okay, thanks. I didn't see that in the table necessarily. Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DuPont. Other questions from the board? Okay. Excuse me. So one thing the board's going to, we're reviewing this, where this does fall under the requirements for a variance. There are 4 criteria that the board needs to find, and it needs to find in favor of all 4 criteria in order to approve a variance. The first is a circumstance relating to the soil condition, shape, or topography, especially affecting such land or structure, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it is located that would substantiate the granting of variance. The second is how the literal enforcement of the provisions of the zoning bylaw specifically relating to the circumstances affecting the land or structure noted above would involve a substantial hardship, financial or otherwise. The third is to describe how desirable relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good, and then how desirable relief may be granted without nullifying or substantially derogating from the intent or purpose of the zoning bylaws. And here that all relates to the request to create a nonconformity in regards to the rear yard setback. So unless there are further questions from the board at this time, I'm going to go ahead and open this hearing for public comment. So public questions and comments are taken as they relate to the matter at hand. It should be directed to the board for the purpose of informing its decision. Members of the public will be granted time to ask questions and make comments. Members of the public who wish to speak can digitally raise their hand using the button on the React tab in the Zoom application. If you're calling in by phone, please dial *9 to indicate you would like to speak. You will be called upon by the chair. You'll be asked to give your full name and address for the record, and you'll be given time for your questions and comments. All questions are to be addressed through the chair, and please do remember to speak clearly. Once all public questions and comments have been addressed, the public comment period will be closed. So with that, are there members of the public who wish to address this hearing, which is in regards to 28 Draper Avenue?
Yes.
I see identified it's Robert Schaefer. If you could confirm your name and give us your address for the record.
Okay, I'm Robert Schaefer, 29 Fairview Avenue, Arlington, and we are, our property is directly behind this 28 Draper property. So,
Great, thank you. If you could provide your comment.
okay, could I have permission to share my screen?
You had some photos that you had submitted. Is that what you're
Yes.
looking for?
Yes, that's what I would like to show.
I could go ahead and share those for you if you'd like.
Okay, that's good. There are two photos from the view from our backyard.
All right.
Okay, so this is the barn from our backyard, and so my concern is any impact on our property as a result of the construction. I do have a question as to whether the concept of moving the barn really means physically picking it up and sliding it along the ground or whatever they do to move it without demolishing it and rebuilding it, because I think the impact on us would depend on what their process will be. So my concern is twofold. One is their property is slightly higher in elevation than ours, so any water drainage would drain onto our property. Notice that there are 5 trees on our side directly behind the barn, and those trees do a pretty good job of soaking up any water that would come onto our property from there. So we have not had any problem with flooding with those trees there. And also, the barn has a gutter across the top, so all the rainwater is directed off to the side, so it doesn't impact us. The other item that we want to make sure is maintained is that nice high 8-foot high privacy fence that gives both of us some privacy. And I want to ask what's their plan to maintain a fence like that, an 8-foot high fence. When the barn is removed. I'll also comment that in replacing and redoing the fence itself needs some work. The fence is in the state of collapsing. As a matter of fact, it did start to collapse into my yard. And I had to go in and reinforce it to keep it from falling down into my yard. It's more so on the other side of the fence, but even on this one, in the other picture, I did have to put it's hard to see, but there is a piece of wood that secures the fence to the barn, because that last post of the fence was collapsing into our yard. So my questions are, how are they going to maintain that? And also the foundation wall of the barn, what's their plan with respect to what's going to replace that foundation wall? We have a dog who I let out in our yard, and I want to make sure that he is protected from going onto the construction site. So that's it. And so my question is, when they say move the barn, does that really mean to move the structure without demolishing it?
Let me go ahead and direct that question to Mr. Lodge, the architect. What would be involved in relocating the barn?
Well, yes, our intention is to raise the barn up on cribbing and to physically move it. And I believe Kelly had spoken with the neighbor about redoing the fence once that had happened. So yes, I think we would where there'd be a big sort of gap in your fence, which was the facade of the barn, that would be replaced by a fence.
Would the foundation for the barn be removed as well, or would that remain?
No, I think probably what we would end up doing is sort of repairing the foundation to the extent that we needed to as a retaining wall.
Okay.
Could you say that again, please?
So I think that what would make the most sense is to sort of reconfigure the foundation wall as a retaining wall. So basically leave the foundation wall where it is. And then if we needed to cap it, just to make sure that the weather doesn't get into the concrete, we would cap it so that it remains as a retaining wall. And then I believe what we probably would end up doing is putting the fence on top of that.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Great.
So do you need any incursion into my yard in order to do this project?
That is a good question. I think probably all we might need to, so when you lift the barn up, basically you get sort of large beams that you slide underneath it. So it may, those beams may sort of, go into the air, put it that way, of your yard, say 6 inches or something like that. But it wouldn't be very much, but it'd be something that we would obviously work with you to make sure, it didn't hurt your trees or damage the root structure or anything like that.
Okay, so I feel if you keep the foundation as a retaining wall, that would probably avoid any disruption to the root structure of the trees.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything further, Mr. Schaefer?
Well, just if they have any idea what their schedule will be for doing this, and when to start, and about how long they think it's going to take.
Well, I think probably we would, if we get the necessary approvals, we'd set up a meeting with you to go over that.
Okay. I think that's it for my questions, and I just want to make sure that the whoever is supervising the construction actually pays attention to my concerns and supervises the actual workmen, that they get the message.
Well, so yeah, I think we would definitely work with you to make sure that your concerns are addressed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer.
Okay, that's all I had.
Are there other members of the public who wish to address this this hearing? Being 28 Draper Avenue. Seeing none, I will go ahead and close the public comment period for this hearing. I will return to the board. So what the board has before it, it's two requests. There is a special permit request and a variance request. So we're reviewing the requests that are being made under a special permit. Excuse me. It doesn't appear that actually any of the special permits, any of the sections would necessarily need a special permit, because they would all be covered under the variance that is being requested. So that being the case, the variance that is being requested would essentially create a new nonconformity, which would be in the rear yard of the property. The nonconformity would change the required setback from the 17.7, or excuse me, the 17.6 feet, the 17'7" that's required under the zoning bylaw, and would reduce that to 11'5". And the reason for that request is that in consultation with the Historical Commission regarding the existing barn, in order to not demolish the barn and relocate it on the site, what they discussed at their meeting and what they came up with was that they could allow the existing barn to be moved from the corner of the lot, rotated essentially 90 degrees, and attached to the existing house. But in so doing, it now creates a new nonconformity. So what the board has, I think, as its primary question is whether this project meets the requirements for a variance. The first requirement for a variance is that there be a circumstance relating to the soil condition, the shape, or topography, especially affecting such land or structures, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it is located, that would substantiate the granting of a variance. So the statement from the applicant on the variance application, they note that the shape of the lot is currently configured such that the existing barn, which the Historical Commission will not allow them to demolish, violates both the rear and side yard setbacks. Their goal is to create an accessory dwelling unit that will connect to the existing house. So the existing barn does not violate the zoning bylaws because it's an accessory structure. It's not a primary structure. And it's a pre-existing non-conforming structure at that. So it's really the attachment of that to the primary house that creates this condition. So would like to hear some opinions from the board on sort of their sense as to what their feeling is in regards to whether this variance application meets that first criteria, that there is something relating to the soil condition, shape, or topography, especially affecting such land or structure, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it's located, that would substantiate the granting of a variance.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. DuPont.
So I don't mean to derail the variance line of inquiry, but I was wondering today a little bit about, non-conforming uses and structures. And I don't know if that's something that might have been discussed with inspectional services or planning. Because I'm wondering, first of all, are we looking at this home as a non-conforming structure because of the front yard setback is not is not adequate. It's not 25 feet. So is this a non-conforming structure for purposes of section 8.1, do you think?
Interesting question. We did not approach it that way.
Can I
Um,
can I just add then, because if it's a non-conforming structure, right? The 8.11A permits an extension of a non-conformity with a special permit, right? I mean, I think that that's how we've always treated it. And I would say that I think, we've always taken the opportunity where we can avoid a variance and approach things from the special permit perspective. We've taken that opportunity. So I was just trying to cobble together the sections that had been noted in the application. And I just wanted to just mention them. And then, if people don't think that that's the applicable, part of this analysis, then we can move on. So I looked at the, general provision in 8.1.1A, which just said that you can extend a nonconformity, which I think assumes that you have a non-conforming structure to begin with, which is why I asked the question about the home being non-conforming because of the front yard. But if it were, if it is non-conforming, then I'm wondering if there's the possibility of looking at, the bottom of that paragraph A and saying, oh, well, we do have the authority to extend a non-conformity by special permit. And then if you move along, you get to 8.1.3 and it's B, and that's just specific to single and two family homes, right? So that's the part that says, you can you can extend the nonconformity or increase the nonconformity with a finding by the board that that it's not going to be, the structural change won't be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. And then, you got over to reduction or increase in 8.16A, and it allows you to, it seems to me, to reduce setbacks if you have the authority to grant a special permit under 8.1.3B. So I'm sorry to be jumping around, but it does seem to me that, if you go 8.1.1 to 8.1.3 to 8.1.6A, 8.16A says, well, look, if you've been able to act in accordance with 8.13B, in this case, you would be able to allow for the reduction in the area or the setback. And I know that there's a reference up then on 8.1.4D about moving structures on the property to another location, which says that every portion of the structure shall be conforming. However, I think that's in conflict with the authority under 8.1.1, which allows you to be able to increase the nonconformity, even if it's going to reduce the setback. So it's just those were those pieces I was trying to tie together to get to a possible outcome without having to go the variance route. So I don't know if anybody else had looked at that, or if I may be missing something. I'm entirely capable of doing that, but I'm just curious about that.
Chairman.
Mr. Hanlon.
Whoops. Can't see me. I wonder, I just have a question about the analysis that I don't quite follow and that Mr. DuPont has set out. Up to now, we usually are talking, when we are talking about 8.1.3b, of extending the same nonconformity that we already had. So if you were just sort of moving further into the front yard here, that would count. But it's not equally clear to me that leaving the existing nonconformity the same and then invading some other setback or introducing some other conformity. Nonconformity would fit here. In other words, it's not like the structure has this generic nonconformity to it. Extending the nonconformity, I thought, meant you had to take the existing nonconformity and increase it in some way. Whereas here, it looks as if, and I would have thought that what we have here is a different nonconformity. Before we had a penetration of the front yard. Now we're talking about we're introducing a new nonconformity in the rear yard. And I never would have thought that the mere fact that they were both nonconformities, even if they were for a different setback requirement, made them essentially the same, so that the one is the extension from the other. And so, having rambled on for a little while, giving Mr. DuPont a chance to gather his thoughts together, I sort of am curious as to, if we were going to write this, what would be the analysis that says this is the extension of an existing nonconformity rather than a introduction of a new nonconformity because it's in a different yard.
I think that point's really well taken. It's just that when I was reading all of these sections together, I was focusing just on, and I agree with you, I'm sort of focusing more just on the nature of it as a non-conforming structure without identifying which portion is non-conforming. And I'm extending then the ability to be able to increase the non-conformity to an area where the non-conformity does not exist. So I do understand that, but I don't necessarily see that the language in the bylaw has that limitation. It may logically be that that's what's intended. I'm not arguing that, but I'm not sure that I see language in there that says you can't do what I'm saying. And in particular, because the variance request is dependent upon we're here because the Historic Commission is not going to allow the barn to be torn down. We've already established that this could be built essentially and conform to the setback. So I'm struggling with that because I don't know whether or not the character of the barn as being inviolable means that you can't that you have something under the variance provision that gets you free of the the restraints or constraints. So I agree with Mr. Hanlon's observations. I was just trying to think of it in maybe broader terms.
Mr. Hanlon?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Could I make a decision or ask a question? I have never.
Go ahead.
Okay. The house itself, is going to be taking out a piece of modern, area. And the reason that the house is the barn is going to be moved because we want to have that as a historic piece. And, the thing about variance and not variance and all of this, I'm not very knowing about, but moving an old barn, which is already on the back of the building against the back of the house, it just kind of makes me think that because of the historic piece, that it should not be called a variance in that way because of the fact that it is in fact already on that piece of property. And I find this to be very strange that it can't be moved. And that's kind of something that, you know, I don't go through zoning things every day, but you know, what we're doing is preserving a historic building.
Right.
And that, you know, that's something that is what I believe is the best way that we can preserve it by doing that.
Thank you for that. So the question sort of comes, it's a vested rights question in terms of the existing house. So if this was, if the house was as it is now, where it has a nonconformity with the front yard setback, but is conforming with the other yard setbacks, and if this was not a historic case, but the applicants were coming before us seeking to do an addition on the rear of the house, that would intrude and create a new nonconformity. Under state law, it's my understanding that because it is a new nonconformity, that new nonconformity requires a variance. But it also requires a finding that it's not substantially more detrimental because it would be increasing the nonconforming nature of the property. And so I don't know if I think the board would have to discuss whether it feels that there is something inherent about the fact that this is a historically significant house and a historically significant structure that's being relocated. If there is something about that that creates a situation where it is not where it somehow does not require a finding of a variance. I would ask the applicants if they considered, so this is all coming about because they're going to be attached, and because the barn would be attached to the house, it's now part of the house, and now the house is extra large, and intruding into the setback. Has there been any consideration of setting the barn closer to the house, but not physically connected to the house, which would allow it to remain as a separate structure and therefore would not create this new nonconformity?
Well, I think given the nature of the genesis of the project, which was basically to sort of to provide space for a elderly an elderly parent, the connection piece is pretty important, sort of functionally. And then I would also say that if you did move the barn, then I think you're probably going to run into the same problem, because then you're creating then I think you would, I think you wouldn't end up with enough usable open space, which is a different, it's not a setback, but I think it's still another, nonconformity that would then probably trigger the same issues, wouldn't it?
Well, if it was if the barn was moved to essentially where you're showing it on your plan, but it was, say there was 2 feet between it and the house, it's
Well,
no longer connected. It's an accessory structure and would not not be a part of the primary building, and would not be subject to the same setback requirements. It would be subject to the setback requirements for an accessory dwelling unit, which
yeah.
would be 6 feet.
Well, if we're going to sort of, delve deep into the semantics, then I mean, personally, I thought Mr. DuPont's approach was elegant, but I think this is a decision for you. I mean, I think my point, or our point, would be that I think that would still, you're still, if you have to sort of go outside to come back inside, and you're going to have to leave a certain amount of space, because you can't have a sort of a 2-foot space that gather cobwebs and raccoons and things like that. So So, but yeah, I mean, we thought about that, early on, and just didn't think it was sort of, it functionally made sense. So,
Okay.
that's where we
Um,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hanlon.
I'm going to sort of circle back to what Ms. Robinson said, because it seems to me that under state law, there is no way we can avoid the variance inquiry here. There is no way in which the interests that are very valuable ones that are protected by the Historic Commission can override the state law that says these are the criteria. Now, there's a terrific case here for why it is in the public interest to do that. That's criteria 3. But state law is clear that you have to meet all 4. And that's not semantic. That's just what the law is. And they have that law because they thought that people were making too many exceptions before, and they wanted to cut it back. And that's what we've been living with now for a long time. And we've had lots of really appealing cases that we've had to turn down because they didn't meet that first criteria. So I would just encourage, as we think about this, to be thinking about ways of doing this, that ways of getting the job done that may be less than perfect, but actually enable you to do the requirements. And just sort of, I don't think that, to me at least, you can't really rely on the notion that historic preservation is really important to get out of the state law requirements here. And so if you can figure out another way to do it that satisfies the historic preservation interest and also enables you either to make it not need a variance, or I don't really, or conceivably, as Mr. DuPont argued, maybe it qualifies. But it seems to me that if you can figure out an imaginative way to solve this problem without throwing yourself against the language of the state variance law, that you would be wise to give full consideration to that.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. DuPont.
So I was just looking at the definition of attached and detached. And I know we've been through this before in other cases. I just sort of forget what the outcome was. And I don't know if these are the current definitions. So building attached is building having any portion of one or more walls in common with the adjoining buildings. But then when you get to building detached, it says a building with no physical connection to another building.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering, like, if you were to set it, away from the house by 2 or 3 feet, could you have a breezeway, or would that overcome the detached nature of it?
So that has been revised, and I thought it had been accepted by the state because it was voted on last year at town meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the definition is slightly different now for those two. So
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
don't think the current, what is it?
building attached is a building having any portion of one or more walls or roofs in common with another building or buildings, or otherwise connected by a roof to another building or buildings. And then the definition for building detached is a building that does not meet the definition of building attached.
So a breezeway could conceivably work, something along those lines?
So if the roof connects both structures and it's a covered breezeway, then it's connected by a roof and it is connected.
Ah,
But if
the
one
idea
had
with
a
this?
canopy and the canopy ended short of the accessory building, it would not be connected.
okay.
Because this came out of the one where we had the deck that was connecting the buildings, and
Yep.
we didn't think that a deck would be considered connecting them.
Okay. So
if the building was moved over, on the side of the house, and that would probably be on the driveway side. That would be something that you could get away from this variance. And if you could live with that, then, it would not be, something that would have to go with the variance. And I'm just talking with John and Kelly about this. And I know what your wish is, but I'm interested that maybe you could think about this.
I think I'm a little confused. I don't know if it matters so much what part of the house it attaches in, other than the side is our kitchen. So we were trying not to tear down our kitchen. But the truth of the matter is we're trying to bring my mother-in-law in from India. She's had like 4 major heart surgeries in the past 12 months. And
Yep.
so I don't want her to have to come in and outside the house just to get into the kitchen or into with us. So the point I think would be that it would really have to be attached somehow so that we could find her. She doesn't speak English, like there are a lot of things that would be difficult about having her in a separate dwelling if we were gonna bring her here for medical treatment and things like that. So that was our goal in trying to figure out how to build this. I mean, initially we did think about just leaving the barn where it was and trying to do it, but it just wouldn't have made sense given like the weather and her medical conditions and things like that. But if we're talking about attaching it to a different part of the house, that would also be fine. I just think then we'd be too close to the side neighbors. Although, John, you could speak to that because I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me from what the board is saying that, if it touches, then we're probably gonna end up violating one of the setbacks. And then we're gonna, then we haven't found a way out of the variance conundrum. Is that right? Did you say?
That's my understanding of the way that the state law for variances works. Is that because we would be creating a new nonconformity, unfortunately, it does require a variance, even if the house itself has a different kind of existing nonconformity. And that being the case, there's the 4 criteria that we have to find. All 4 criteria are met, and the first one is that there's something about the soil conditions, and there hasn't been any testimony provided that there's a big chunk of ledge sticking out somewhere or some
The way I was looking at it is that since the barn was, could not be torn down, I thought, all right, well, that makes the site. I was considering the barn to be part of the site because as far as the historic condition is concerned, I can't tear it down. So that makes that is a site condition that I have to deal with.
Right. But specifically, the state law reads soil conditions, which is not shape. It's not a shape of lot issue.
I was sort of,
and there's not a big topographic issue.
Right.
So there's nothing that affects the land. So then the question is there something about the shape, the soil shape or topography that's affecting the structure itself? Nope, hopefully you didn't just lose me.
You just lost your image.
Oh,
Just your
the
camera
image.
turned
Okay,
on.
as long as you can still hear me. So there is this existing historic structure. There are 2 historic structures on the property, the one being the main house, one being the barn. And I know that there's been discussions with the historical commission about relocating it and not demolishing it. The historical commission would very much like it to remain and not be demolished. I don't know if that. So then the question is that something that doesn't generally affect the zoning district in which it's located? There are a number of historic houses. There's I think 6 or 7 historic houses in a row here, right on Draper, that all have similar issues involving historic structures and the desire of the town to preserve its historic structures, but also the need of the residents of the town to be able to live in their houses in a fashion that works for them, and especially being able to have an accessory dwelling unit to allow for the care of members of the family. So while from my perspective, while we're not, I laud what you're trying to do, and I completely understand from the historic perspective why it's being attempted to be done this way, and from the residents' perspective as to why the intent is being done to do this way. I'm just having a very difficult time finding that there is something unique about this property that comes from the land and comes from the structure and does not come from the personal circumstances that substantiates the granting of a variance. And as we had discussed at the start, there are definitely ways of proceeding on this site that would allow for the creation of an accessory dwelling unit that would meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw. But unfortunately, they don't meet the needs or the requirements of the Historical Commission. And so I'm sort of at a little bit of a loss here as to how the board should proceed, because I feel we're unfortunately for the applicants, I sort of feel they're sort of stuck between two different boards, and neither of us is allowed to, we each have our own thing that we're supposed to be enforcing, and we're sort of enforcing at odds with each other.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Hanlon.
So I'd like to sort of complicate this a little bit further. As I think about it, I'm not 100% sure what a roof is. And I'm pretty sure that a roof is something with tiles and things on it. It's a solid structure that can be used to connect things. But I'm not equally convinced that it's just that a canopy by itself would be a roof. So that if what you were looking for was sort of elementary, but not structural, but some protection from the elements, does there come a point where that is more like an umbrella and less like a roof? A quick look at the zoning bylaw doesn't give me a definition. And if you look in the dictionary, the definitions of roofs are all over the place, and some of them talk about the heavens being the roof of the earth, which is not a very helpful way of approaching the question. But I wonder if it's possible that if there was some gap, some way that you have a functional shelter from the elements, but you don't have the connection of a solid or substantial physical structure, that you wouldn't necessarily have a connection by a roof, and then it wouldn't be attached. And if it isn't attached, then it would be detached, and then you would be able to get by. So, I guess I'm trying to imitate Mr. DuPont and thinking broadly on the question. But that may be another textual way that we can avoid the necessity of going the variance route.
Well, certainly from the discussion that was held at the redevelopment board during their meetings before town meeting last year, and the discussion at town meeting last year, the intent was that if you had a horizontal structure that was above your head and connected to both buildings, that was considered a roof. Now, if it was suspended off of one building and didn't connect to the second building, that's not a connection.
Well, what if suppose what you had are two things that were not actually connected to either building. They were connected to poles or something that are on the side. But the structure extended over one or both of the buildings, but wasn't actually physically connected to it, but was connected to a different structure. Would that count?
You would, so it would be its own independent structure. Uh, would it be an accessory structure limited to the height of 20 feet? That I don't know.
Wouldn't that be a second accessory building on the site?
It would be a second accessory building, yeah.
What if it was what if it was connected on one side but not the other?
Then it's an extension of one, but you would then have two structures, one that is
And I think isn't there something in the building code where I think there has to be a certain separation between buildings.
does.
Every town's different,
Yeah.
but I believe I asked the building inspector, and I think it's a couple of feet. You know, from
Okay.
a fire safety point of view, it makes sense.
Now, of course, it's true that I mean, as we think, there's one really simple solution here that sacrifices the interest of historical preservation to the interest of the applicant, and that is for them to wait for a year.
Yeah.
And you know, we're at the situation where something has to give, and I'm not quite sure where it would be.
Yeah.
But the default right now is that, I mean, given the analysis that's happened so far, the default right now is that the applicant sort of has the short straw at this point, and I'm not sure that that's where it ought to be, but it's really difficult to get through the thicket of law here to what seems like a sensible result.
Yeah, 'cause I don't think our zoning bylaw addresses separation requirements between, unless there's separation of primary buildings, there is information about that. But this is be a primary and an accessory. I don't think there's a specific requirement. Um, so I think at this point, we have a couple different options on how we can proceed. The board, I feel that if the board was to proceed to, the board could decide it has enough information to close the hearing, which I'm not entirely sure we do, because I think we do have some questions about how exactly to apply certain aspects of the zoning bylaw that would benefit from having a further discussion with the town. And I think that it would be beneficial, excuse me, to have the applicant discuss a little bit more with their architect about what sort of options they may be willing to consider. I think from the board's perspective, I think unless there's any objections from the board, I think what we really need to confirm with the town is that how we are interpreting the separation issue. And I think we should probably confirm the question about a variance, although I'm fairly confident we're interpreting the question of variance correctly. And Mr. Hanlon, I don't know if there's any relevant case law that you may have run across ever about historical structures and how that may apply to variances, but I don't recall seeing anything in my time on the
No,
board.
I've never seen anything that does that either, and I don't see a textual basis for it.
Yeah. I don't know. Mr. Baranowski, I don't know if you have any insights on that side.
Under our way is that when we're faced with this kind of thing, we have gone to the like Mike Champa,
Mhm.
and he has said and that we have you know uh, for example, we have uh, you know historic buildings that have a front porch, and the height of the you know the uh, you know fence that goes, or the area that goes against the completely, um, we can keep the height of the railings. And that is something, because it's been over years,
Mhm.
It has been the fact that that is the way that the uh, the railing goes, and it does not have to meet the height.
Mhm.
And those kinds of things, that's why I'm talking about this, is that those kinds of things have been provided historic preservation uh, time and time again.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that this is something that is something like, like that, because we are really trying to preserve historic buildings.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, things like that fall under the building code under 780 CMR. Um, it's a completely different part of state code, whereas this is under, chapter
I'm
50.
just saying that
Yeah.
we've worked with, somebody like Mike Champa
Yep.
on that kind of thing. And, you were suggesting that that would be something
Yeah.
that we could do and make sure that we're not doing something,
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
That's why I'm saying these are things that have happened,
Yeah.
um, you know, every, time after time again.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. LeBlanc.
one clarifying question. I know we have the upcoming changes to state law in regards to ADUs.
Yep.
Is that going to come into play here, or is that only just that we can't do special permits, but if a variance is still required for something, then the new state law provision doesn't cover that?
So the new state law went into effect on February 2nd, I think.
Okay.
And it does not, it's under 48 section 3A, I think. So it does not, I don't think it changes the variance requirements at all.
Okay.
Okay. Um, so at this point, I think we're at a point where um, it might be advisable to uh, maybe request discuss the possibility of a continuance with the applicant, so we can have I can have a conversation with Mr. Champa about sort of things that may be able to be done, and I would very much encourage the applicants to have that conversation as well. I think the board is of the opinion that a variance is requested here, and from my perspective, I don't think this this project meets the requirements for a variance. But I would want to have that conversation with the building commissioner as well, just to confirm the opinion of his department on that question. Are there other issues that the board feels need to be resolved before we could return to this discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hanlon.
I just, Mr. DuPont's argument went sort of by pretty quickly without our being able to look at the statute and read along with him and think about all the implications of it. I think that probably I would like to have time to think that through a little more, and maybe even to confer with town council about it. And I guess ultimately it would be worth asking a question to see whether, I mean, you had asked me earlier whether I knew of any case which allowed for historic preservation rules to take precedence over a variance requirement. You know, I said I hadn't heard of such a thing, and you hadn't either, but that doesn't necessarily mean that our lawyers haven't heard of such a case. And so I would want to learn about that too, and maybe take a look to see whether there's any law that actually addresses this. And I'd encourage the applicant, if they know of any law that actually that does that, to do their best shot of providing us with guidance. But those would be issues that I'd like to spend some time over the next couple of weeks doing before we have to re-deal with this case again.
Well, so I mean, I'm happy to discuss this with Mr. Champa in the next week or so. Do you think you could get some kind of advice on this, I guess, by the next hearing date?
Grab my calendar. So the next hearing date is March 11th. Let's see what's coming up. We have Pond Lane and Woodside Lane. The reason for my hesitation is just that those two continuances are going to be rather busy. But I do understand your desire to move quickly. Certainly, if you were able to come back on the 25th of March, we have nothing else on the agenda for that date, so that would be an easy date for us. If you would like to come back on the 11th, I mean, we could make it work.
Well, I mean, if that's, if the earlier the better, I think, from our perspective. But it's
Okay.
it's as to whether you think.
Right. It's just,
Okay. All right, because there's a very good chance actually that Pond Lane is going to be a lot simpler than I think. So, all right. So that being, were there any other, Mr. Holly?
Yeah, I had a question on the because of the new UHLC, the whole ADU mandate happening. Do you think there is any definitions out there has an impact of what we're looking at? Should the board consider looking at the upcoming ADU requirement into account when we make a decision on this?
So I would think it would be worthwhile to look at what the redevelopment board is proposing to be voted on at town meeting in regards to changing the town's accessory dwelling unit bylaw. Because I know has been vetted with council about making sure that it makes changes in our bylaws that comply with state law. Certainly any change that happens at town meeting this spring won't go into effect until October. At the town level, with the exception of those items that are already contravened by state law, which are already contravened. So I would take a look at what the ARB has on its docket for town meeting, because I think that that's a pretty good statement of where they see that where they and legal see that changes in our bylaw are required.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, so I see on the list here, so we're gonna confirm rules about a variance, take a look at whether there's precedents about historic and variances and how those come together. Mr. Dupont, if I could ask you just to put together some quick notes about what you were outlining, so that something that the board can look at. And then just confirming with the ADU guidelines indicate, so we can get all of that stuff together. And then we'll meet again on March 11th to review that information. That seems reasonable to everyone? So then, unless there's anything else, I'll move that the Zoning Board of Appeals for the Town of Arlington continue public hearing for docket 3835 28 Draper Street to Tuesday, March 11th, 2025 at 7:30 p.m.
Second,
So a roll call vote of the board, voting yes or no. Mr. Dupont,
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon,
yeah,
Mr. Holly,
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Baranowski.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. So we are continued on 28 Draper Street until March 11th. Thank you all for being with us tonight on that. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right, well, have a good evening.
Thank you. You as well. So coming up for the board, March 11th, we'll be talking 28 Drapers again. 20 Pond Lane is on there, as is 39 Woodside Lane, excuse me. Colleen, have you seen any new information from either of those applicants?
I have nothing. The neighbors for Pond Lane have been asking every week if it's their turn
Okay.
yet, but nothing from the applicants.
Okay. So last night, the ARB held its first meeting in regards to the docket for town meeting this year. It was specifically items that were originated by the board, but also organized by the ZBA. So they discussed the change, adding the definition for lot coverage and making it the same definition as building coverage, which we had discussed before. And then also changes to the section 6110A residential parking in residential districts. And so there's some good discussion on both of those. The final vote on those items, I believe, is April 7th. Will be the final vote by the board on those items. That is all I had on our agenda for this evening. So I'd like to thank you all for your participation in tonight's meeting of the Arlington Zoning Board of Appeals. Appreciate everyone's patience throughout the meeting. I would especially like to thank Colleen Ralston, Mike Champa, Joanne Robinson for their assistance in this meeting. Please note the purpose of the board's recording of the meeting is to ensure the creation of an accurate record of its proceedings. It's our understanding the recording made by ACMi will be available on demand at acmi.tv within the coming days. If anyone has comments or recommendations, please send them via email to zba@town.arlington.ma.us. That email address is also listed on the Zoning Board of Appeals website. So to conclude tonight's meeting, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
so move, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dupont. So roll call vote of the board, yes or no? Mr. Dupont,
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon,
Yes.
Mr. Holly,
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Baranowski.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. The board is adjourned. Thank you all for your participation tonight. And we'll see you all on the 11th.
Night.
All right.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.